Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. We love to dig into complex topics, and this one is no exception. We're diving into the world of Canada-U.S. relations. Specifically, we're looking at things under the second Trump presidency. It's been a bit of a wild ride, so we've got some fascinating news articles lined up to really unpack what's going on, especially when it comes to trade and tariffs.
And what's really interesting is that we've got perspectives from both Canadian and U.S. officials. So we're going to get both sides of the story. It's not just about what happened, but about what's happening right now. This relationship is in motion, and there's potential for things to really shift.
Okay, so let's jump right into it. What's the big headline that everyone's talking about right now?
Well, the biggest story is definitely Trump's threat to impose a 25% tariff on all Canadian imports.
25%. That's a pretty big deal.
Mm.
Why is he taking such an aggressive stance?
Trump has cited several reasons for this. He's concerned about border security, illegal immigration, and trade deficits. He's been pretty vocal about it, too. He even said, and I quote, "The word tariffs is one of the most beautiful words in the dictionary."
Wow, he really said that, huh? Interesting. But are these concerns actually justified? Like when it comes to the trade deficit, is that really as big of a deal as he's making it out to be?
Well, let's break it down. Trump has claimed that there is a $200 billion trade deficit with Canada. But when you look at the actual numbers, the figure in 2024 was $54.99 billion.
So not quite as dramatic as he's suggesting.
Right. And when you look at illegal immigration, arrest numbers at the U.S.-Canada border are actually way lower than at the U.S.-Mexico border.
So it seems like there's more to the story than meets the eye.
Absolutely. There's a lot of nuance here.
Okay, so we've talked about Trump's side of things. But what about Canada? How are they reacting to all of this?
Well, Canada is definitely not taking this lying down. They've been pushing back pretty hard. We've seen strong responses from Prime Minister Trudeau all the way down to the provincial premiers.
So they're not just talking tough. They're ready to take action.
Exactly. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, he's actually planning an early election just to secure a mandate to fight these tariffs. He's even talking about retaliatory tariffs, like a dollar-for-dollar response.
So if the U.S. imposes a tariff, Canada will do the same, right back at them.
Yeah, and he's also talking about removing American alcohol from Ontario liquor stores. That's a pretty bold move.
It sounds like things could escalate pretty quickly.
Yeah. And then you've got former Prime Minister Chrétien. He didn't hold back at all. He basically told Trump to give your head a shake. He even joked about cutting off electricity to Trump Tower.
Classic Chrétien, right? It really goes to show just how connected these two countries are, even when things get tense. But jokes aside, this situation has some serious implications for key industries, right?
Oh, absolutely. Take a North American auto industry, for example. It's super integrated. Parts are constantly crossing the border back and forth during manufacturing. These tariffs would completely disrupt that balance.
And likely drive up prices for everyone.
Exactly. Consumers on both sides of the border would feel it.
And then there's the energy sector. Canada is a huge supplier of oil and gas to the U.S., especially after the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion.
Right. These tariffs could really mess with energy prices and energy security for the U.S. It just adds another layer of complexity to the whole situation.
So we're seeing potential impacts on these massive industries.
Yeah.
Well, what about the average person? What can they expect to see?
Well, think about everyday things like groceries. Fresh produce could get more expensive. Alcoholic beverages might see a price hike. It's like, if this trade war actually happens, it's not just going to be a battle between politicians. Everyone's going to feel it in their wallets.
That's a good point. This isn't just some abstract political game. It has real-world consequences for everyone.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're seeing the potential impacts on big industries and everyday consumers. It's a lot to take in. But what about the bigger picture? What does this mean for the long-term relationship between Canada and the U.S.?
That's where things get really interesting. You see a new trade deal replace NAFTA back in 2020, but it's actually up for review in 2026.
So these current tensions could really impact those future negotiations.
Oh, yeah. It's like trying to have a friendly chat with someone when, there's a storm brewing overhead.
Not exactly the best environment for making deals, right?
Nope. And,
Yeah.
we need to remember that the U.S. and Canada share the longest undefended border in the world. Their economies are deeply intertwined. There's a long history of cooperation and mutual benefit.
So it seems kind of counterintuitive to risk all of that just for a trade war, especially one that might not even work.
You've hit the nail on the head. History has shown us time and again that trade wars rarely have clear winners. They often end up hurting the very people they're supposed to help, consumers and workers on both sides of the border.
So what does this all mean for our listeners? How can we make sense of this whole situation and, how it could affect us?
Well, it means that we're all stakeholders in this relationship. What happens between the U.S. and Canada has a direct impact on our lives. our wallets, our future. This isn't just some political game playing out in the headlines. This is something that could affect us all in a very real way.
That's kind of a sobering thought. So what can we do about it? Are we just pawns in this whole economic chess match?
Not necessarily. We have a voice and we can choose to use it.
Hmm.
We can support businesses on both sides of the border that are pushing for free and fair trade. We can contact our elected officials and let them know how we feel.
And stay informed, right? Engage in these discussions.
Exactly. And we can also make conscious choices as consumers,
Hmm.
support businesses that align with our values. Even small actions can make a difference.
It's good to remember that we're not powerless in all of this. We can make our voices heard.
Definitely. And maybe most importantly, we can resist that divisive rhetoric that tends to surround these debates. We need to remind ourselves and everyone else that cooperation, not confrontation, is the path to shared prosperity.
We've covered a lot today. From Trump's tariff threats to Canada's response, the potential impact on businesses and consumers, the whole long-term relationship between these two countries. It's a lot to process. But I think it's really important to understand these complexities.
It is. And this whole situation is still unfolding. There's still so much we don't know. And the future of this relationship, it really hangs in the balance.
Yeah, there are a lot of unknowns. But I think by staying informed, staying engaged, and really looking beyond the headlines, we can all play a part in shaping a positive outcome.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up, there's one more thing I want to touch on. We've talked about the economic side of things, the political side of things. But what about the human cost?
Right. It's easy to get caught up in those big picture economic arguments.
Right.
But we're talking about real people's lives, livelihoods, the communities that thrive on that cross-border collaboration.
Exactly. We often get so focused on trade balances and tariffs, but behind all those numbers are families whose lives depend on that smooth flow of goods and services across the border. Think about the tourism industry, cultural exchanges, even just everyday interactions. That's the fabric of this relationship. Those are the human stories that often get lost in all the political noise.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's easy to forget that economics and politics, they aren't just these abstract ideas. They affect real people's lives.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to you, the listener. We've gone through the facts, we've looked at all the different arguments, we've considered the possible outcomes. So now it's time to connect this all back to your own life, your own experiences, your own values.
Right. What really stuck out to you from this deep dive? What questions are you left with? And most importantly, how will you choose to engage with this whole Canada-U.S. relationship? It's complicated and always changing.
We've talked about how close the U.S. and Canada are economically and historically. So given all of that, will they be able to find some common ground on trade? Or are we watching the start of a trade war that could really hurt both countries? Those are tough questions. There aren't any easy answers. But they're worth thinking about as this story continues to develop.
Yeah, for sure. It's a good reminder that we're not just sitting on the sidelines. We have a voice. We can make choices. And those choices matter, whether it's through the things we buy, the way we talk about these issues, or just staying informed and sharing what we've learned. We can all do something.
Absolutely. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this global trade, international relations. It's complicated stuff. But you know what? Every voice matters. When we understand what's at stake and we talk about it thoughtfully, we can help create a future where everyone benefits.
Well said. I think this deep dive has been quite a ride. Lots of information, lots of insights. I don't know about you, but I didn't realize U.S.-Canada relations could be so fascinating, so unpredictable, and honestly a little bit stressful. But one thing's for sure. This story isn't over yet. So stay tuned, stay engaged, and keep those brains working. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.